but they were under the influence of the cheap money and the bubble. But when the bubble burst, there's a recession. But the recession is actually the way the market corrects all the problems from the boom. You have businesses that have to fail because they never should have started. You have to let capital be reorganized more efficiently, which includes labor. People have to lose their jobs in unproductive parts of the economy so they can get jobs someplace else. So you have this process, and it plays out as a recession. It's not fun, it's not pleasant, but it's very necessary. It's the way the economy gets healthy because it got screwed up because of the cheap money that was injected that created that phony boom and all the problems. So George Bush gets into office, and here's a recession. And instead of leveling with the American public and saying, you know what, we need this recession. You know, we never should have, had cheap money. You know, we did all these dumb things. We need to have a recession. Instead of doing that, he went for the stimulus. And we took that cheap money and we went on the biggest spending binge in world history. Americans bought trillions of dollars worth of stuff that they couldn't afford with money they didn't have. We bought stuff that other people made. Our trade deficit went through the roof. For a while, it was running at $60, $70 billion a month. And we were buying all sorts of things. Cars, we were buying consumer electronics, we were buying houses and flipping houses, and we were, loading them up with all the latest gadgets and granite countertops, and, people were doing all sorts of things. But nobody had any of the money. It was all being borrowed. But people were under this delusion that they were actually rich because they thought their houses were getting more expensive, but they weren't. It was a bubble. It was all brought on by cheap credit, by guaranteed mortgages, by Freddie and Fannie, by the government interfering in the market so we wouldn't have a recession. And because we didn't have a recession, the economy never corrected. We never got the rebalancing that we needed. Instead, we simply made the disease worse. The economy didn't get healthier, it got worse. So all those years of growth between 2002 and 2007, where we thought everything was good, everybody was cheerleading the economy because we were spending money and GDP was going up, that was all the problem. We were accumulating all this debt that we couldn't afford. Those years were the problem. The bust of 2008, that was the consequence of the problem and part of the solution. So now the economy is trying to correct itself. Real estate prices were too high. The market wants to bring them down. Lending standards were too lax. The market wants to bring them back up. We have too many people employed in the service sector, in financial services. They need to lose their jobs. We need more people in goods production, in manufacturing. All these things have to happen. But now, it's going to be a much worse recession than the one we would have had in 2001 if the government had stayed out of it, if the government had resisted the temptation to stimulate. But now they're doing it again. And now, what has the government done? We slashed interest rates, not to 1% like Greenspan did, but Bernanke's got them at 0. So if we created all these problems with 1% interest rates, imagine what we're going to do with 0. And the deficits that Bush had, his deficits were $300 billion, $300 billion, the Obama deficits are over $1 trillion, close to $2 trillion in a year. And he's projecting $1 trillion a year as far as the eye can see. So the Obama-Bernanke stimulus is much bigger than the Bush-Greenspan stimulus. So it's going to do much more damage because it's not stimulating the economy. It's stimulating the problem. It's like trying to sober up an alcoholic by giving them more alcohol. It doesn't work. Right? We're digging ourselves into a deeper hole because our problem, what's screwed up about our economy is we borrowed too much money and we spent too much. What we need to do is save more and produce more and invest more. That's the only way out of this hole. But the president's plan, Congress's plan, is the opposite. It's how can we get Americans to buy more stuff and how can we get more credit going to consumers. We don't want that. We need credit to be restricted from consumers so that businessmen can get it, so that producers can get it. But the government doesn't want that. The government is trying to perpetuate the phony prosperity just the way it did under Bush. Because what do the politicians care about? The same thing that the politicians cared about in 2001. They want to get reelected. They want to get elected to another term. So they don't care how much long-term damage their policies inflict on the country, as long as they can get another term in office. And so the way to do that is to promise more government goodies. To say, well, if we just keep interest rates down and spend more money, that we can borrow and spend our way out of a crisis that is a result of too much borrowing and too much spending. Maybe people like that. Maybe people want to hear, this kind of nonsense because it's easier than the real solution. It's like if somebody is overweight and they want to go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, the cure for being overweight is eat more Twinkies and just lie on the couch more. They might not want to hear that what they need to do is go on a diet and exercise, because that might be something that's unpleasant for people who aren't doing that. So, but if we keep letting the politicians tell us that we can eat Twinkies and lose weight, we're not going to do it. And the problem that we have now is that the stimulus is so big and the damage is so great that the next crisis is going to be enormous. Because what the government is doing now to artificially prop up the economy, to prop up real estate prices, to prop up all these Wall Street investment banks that should have failed. Right? We should not have bailed out a single bank. They all should have been allowed to fail. Because the problem is not that they failed. That would have been a problem. But it's a greater problem to bail them out. The cost of doing that will exceed the price we would have paid if we had let them fail. Letting them fail would have been more painful in the short run. But in the long run, it's far more painful to bail them out, because the consequence of this reckless monetary policy is the coming currency crisis. And that's what's coming up. And that is much worse than just a credit crisis, because the currency crisis is going to affect every single American, in particular elderly Americans who are living on fixed incomes, working Americans who are collecting wages, people who have their money in a savings bank, people who have life insurance policies with a cash value. People are going to get wiped out. Because when you print money, there's a cost to it. We are running enormous deficits. We're talking, the deficit this year alone, $1.6 trillion. Where is that money coming from? Right? It's being created. It's being printed. And when that happens, it's not free. We don't get all this government for free. It costs something. And politicians can pretend that it doesn't cost us anything because they're not raising our taxes. But they're printing money, and that's inflation. And when they print money and spend it, it debases the value of the dollar. That's why the dollar hit a new low for the year today. That's why gold hit a new record high, because our money is losing value. And that is how government is paying for this spending. It's paying for it by debasing the value of our money, which means everybody's paycheck is smaller, everybody's savings are smaller, and the way you feel that is that prices start to rise. And they are going to rise substantially. Not just a little bit, but a lot. Remember, oil was $4 a gallon briefly a year or two ago. Imagine when it's $10 a gallon, or higher than that. And it's not just oil that's going up. It's milk, it's bread, it's eggs, it's all the basic necessities that are doubling and tripling in price. And you're also starting to see clothing, textiles moving up in price, and eventually even consumer electronics. Everything's going to start to get more and more expensive. And that is the cost of all of these subsidies and all these bailouts. The government is trying to pretend that we didn't lose any money here. We lost trillions because of their foolish monetary and fiscal policy. But what they want to do is make sure that nobody loses any money. They want to tell people, don't worry, your house is not going to keep going down. If you've got money in a money market and they did something stupid with it, like loaned it out in a subprime mortgage, don't worry, you're not going to lose any money because the FDIC's got it covered. They're trying to make sure that no one loses any money. But in the process of doing that, what they do guarantee is that our money loses value. And that's worse. Because if your money loses half its value, isn't that the same thing as losing half your money? If prices double, it doesn't matter that you have the same amount of money. And the problem is, this can run out of control. Because right now, we're still able to borrow a lot of money from China, from Japan, from Saudi Arabia. We're borrowing all this money from the rest of the world. They're going to stop loaning to us because they're going to realize that we can't pay it back, which we can't. Because we're not investing the money. The money that we're borrowing from China, we're not investing it. We're not building any factories. We're spending it. The money's gone. We're blowing the money.